Hi, y'all. Oh, it's so good to be here. My name is JJ, and I'm going to talk about storytelling because, we humans are natural-born storytellers. It's how we teach. It's how we record our history. It's how we entertain. I love thinking about stories because I'm a professional storyteller. I'm a TV producer. And part of my experience when I was producing the series, The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning, was witnessing how terrified people are to tell their stories around death and grief, which struck me as odd after a while. I mean, how did it become so taboo? I've come to learn that evidently we did used to be better about telling our death stories because back in the day we died at home, and at the very least we had to tell each other what to do. But then the Industrial Revolution happened, as did science and hospitals, and we pushed death out of our parlors and into more sterile environments. The whole process became colder and less human, so naturally we decided not to talk about it. Well, I am here to suggest that maybe we should. I want to encourage us to tell our death stories for two reasons. Number one, telling our death stories helps us process our own emotions, our own grief. And number two, telling our death stories helps others by giving them a framework so they know what the heck to do when they are faced with death, either their own or a loved one's. Now, you do see quite a bit of death in the movies and on TV. It's just often not that realistic, right? Even still, seeing these stories on the screen helps us form a narrative around how things must work. I mean, for example, how many scenes have there been about the moment someone finds out they have a terrible disease? Countless, right? So many dramatic interpretations of what it must feel like to hear the words, "You have cancer." I think that's why when we actually experience something like that, we say things like, "It was so weird. I felt like I was in a movie," right? I know that's what we said the night we found out my son Mason had cancer. That night was surreal. My wife Stacy and I were led down a long hallway in the ER and into a tiny room filled with people in white coats. And we sat there gripping each other as we learned that our 9-year-old had leukemia. That doctor actually looked me in the eye and said, "I'm so sorry, but your life just changed." Everything slowed down. You tell yourself, this can't be happening to us. This happens to other people, not us. It feels like I'm in a movie. Our lives did change. We became a cancer family. And Stacy and our youngest, Madeline, and I watched in horror as Mason lost his hair and his ability to walk and his normal childhood. While in treatment for cancer, Mason would have his 10th birthday and then his 11th. And then there was another impossible conversation. In the autumn of 2020, doctors sat Mason and Stacy and I down to tell us that there was nothing more to be done to save his life. That day did not feel like a movie. It did not feel surreal. More like very, very real. I don't know if that's because we had become accustomed to terrible news or because it wasn't really a surprise, or because I've never seen that dramatized. It was a cold floor, fluorescent lit room with my 11-year-old looking at me with pleading eyes as he started to cry, saying, "Mama, I'm not ready to die yet." It was actual hell. So how did we get through it? How did we get through that time? Well, by hearing stories of death. Stories that gave us handrails so that we knew how to help him while he died. I'll tell you the story that helped Mason. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about him first. I'm his mom. I'm totally biased. I get it. I can actually report he was an incredible kid. There are multiple accounts, for example, of him stopping down bullies. And he was the kind of kid that could do that and then walk away with all parties respecting him. In photographs, he tended to hold his arms out wide. There's actually a group classroom on a field trip photograph, and Mason's the one that's standing there like this. One kid. Before he was diagnosed, when he was in the 3rd grade, there was a bunch of kids over at our house doing sidewalk chalk art. You know, they're doing stick figures and stars and what have you. And Mason wrote in big chalk letters, "Learn to love," as a 9-year-old. Now, he also wrote fart, but that was in a different section. I mean, he was a real kid. I don't mean to put him on too much of a pedestal. Picture me as like a lesbian Homer Simpson, if you will. Why, you little, you know. He and I could go at it, but he was just, what I mean to say is he was also very much a normal little boy. He loved superheroes. For example, really he loved Marvel's The Avengers. We had backpacks and action figures and lunchboxes and you name it, Avengers stuff all over the house. And one of our family's beloved Marvel actors was Chadwick Boseman, also known as the Black Panther. And a few months before Mason died, we were coming home from yet another extended hospital stay, and we were getting him set up in his favorite place in the whole wide world, the mom's bed. And as we were doing it, I was getting him set up, and I glanced at my phone, and I gasped, and I said, "Oh my God, Chadwick Boseman died." Mason lifted his head. "What?" My eyes quickly darted over the article to land on the word cancer. I did not want to read this. "How'd he die, Mama?" I put my phone in my pocket. I started to shuffle around the room, neatening medical supplies stacks. I didn't look him in the eye. "Oh, honey, he was sick." "Sick with what? Cancer?" I felt a cross between fear and anger and nausea. I glanced back at my phone for the details, ready to move past this topic. Colon cancer, very different cancer than you have. I don't want you to be worried. Mason was not as flustered as I clearly was. "Well, read it, Mama." I did not want to read it. Nothing in me wanted to discuss this matter with my cancer-filled little boy. "Mama, read it." Fine. I pulled my phone back up and I read, Chadwick Boseman, who played Black American icons Jackie Robinson and James Brown with searing intensity before inspiring audiences worldwide as the regal Black Panther in Marvel's blockbuster movie franchise, died Friday of colon cancer. He was 43. Boseman died at his home in the Los Angeles area with his wife and family by his side. His publicist, Nikki Fioravanti, told the Associated Press, and the article went on to tout Chadwick's really incredible life and accomplishments. But all I could hear was the ringing in my ear of a cancer death. I finished reading and I launched into this speedy slip-slide reassurance. "Baby, I know it is so sad that Chadwick Boseman died, but honey, that's a very different disease than you have. That's colon cancer, you have leukemia. I don't want this to scare you." Mason was quiet, and there was a long pause. And finally he said, "You can do that?" "Do what?" I said. "You can die at home?" I moved closer to him. "Honey, what do you mean?" And he looked at me with his little Avenger fan eyes, and he said, "I mean, it said that he died at home. They let you do that? They let you die at home?" It was in that moment that I recognized how all-powerful he thought medicine was. He saw sickness and death from it as a medical permission of sorts to move to the next stage. I saw the childhood innocence of how and why and what it is when someone dies. How to explain this. "Yes, honey, sometimes people die at home." Mason was brimming with curiosity. "Well, how? Why? Why wouldn't you be in the hospital if you're that sick?" Okay, so there was no escaping the conversation. I curled up in bed next to him, and I got to him and I said, okay, baby, sometimes when someone's really sick and there's no more medicine that works, they can choose to go on something called hospice care, and they can go home or to a home-like environment and have a nurse help them with like pain meds and anything to keep them comfortable, and they can just die. Mason's eyes were wide. He just nodded. I could tell that he had gripped this idea. No more conversation was needed. So a few months later, we were coming home from that terrible doctor's appointment, and none of us really knowing what to say in the car ride home. And we got him back to the house and set him up in the mom's bed. And I sat down and I looked at him for any sign of what to do next. When he looked at me and he said, Mama, I want to die like Chadwick Boseman. I said, what? He said, I want to do it like Chadwick did. I want to be at home with you and Mommy and Madeline. I don't want to go back to the hospital. And that is how Mason made it clear that his intention was to have a home death. He died about a week later in the mom's bed with Stacy and me holding him, telling him we loved him and we were proud of him and it was okay to go. He had a beautiful death. Thanks to Chadwick Boseman. It took the story of the death of a superhero to give my boy the framework to define his wishes. There was also a story that helped me know how to parent my child through his death. Well before I was willing to admit it was inevitable, we were at the hospital on yet another extended hospital stay, and I was scrolling through my phone. An article popped up entitled 3 Magical Phrases to Comfort a Dying Person. I paused, and then I clicked on it. I could tell immediately it was written by a parent of a child with cancer, leukemia. My heart was in my throat. It was from a blog written by a mother named Jenny Harrington, who was telling the story of the death of her 8-year-old boy, Ewan, from leukemia. And in that story, she laid out plainly and beautifully how she navigated Ewan's fear of his own death by using 3 phrases. Number 1, you will not be alone. Number 2, you will not feel pain. And number 3, we will be okay. Harrington repeated those 3 phrases to her son for the last 2 weeks of his life over and over again, bringing him comfort. With those 3 phrases, Harrington became a supermom, not just to Ewan, but to me. Because sure enough, the day would come that I needed those phrases with Mason, and I used them. And when I did, it opened up the most incredible dialogue. He and I were able to discuss things like whether he wanted to be buried or cremated, what he wanted to do with his stuff. And I was able to answer his questions like, well, what do you guys do on my birthday? Well, we're going to light a candle and put it in a piece of cheesecake and sing to you, of course. He liked that answer. It was the hardest conversation of my life. It was also the most beautiful. I am so grateful that we had it. And I am so grateful to that mother, Jenny Harrington, who told her story of death in a blog. There are so many ways to tell your death story. Tell it to a willing family member. Tell it to a close friend. Tell it to a therapist. Tell it to a grief group. Write it in a blog. Privately write it in your own journal and reread it 10,000 times if you have to, just to understand it. Tell your death story as often as you need. But here's where we need to start. Let's learn to listen. We must first build our skills as an open and willing audience to such stories. Let's be brave enough to hear the story. Let's make it safe for them to tell it. You don't have to offer up some way out of the pain for them. You don't have to tell your own story just to show that you get it. Just listen. It will help them. And then when you are faced with death, either your own or a loved one's, you will be fortified by it. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for hearing mine.